perfect storm has been created to where 1 in 31 kids are on this autism spectrum. Billions of dollars, all the money for research on autism. They've been looking under the wrong rock. They've been looking for the genetic link. There isn't a genetic link. Did you notice that Trump, being Trump as he does, just kind of spilled the beans? I didn't understand why he was talking about when it was about Tylenol. Trump was ahead of his administration in knowing that they're doing studies right now and they're showing that there is a connection with the. We inherited 2 kids because of the tragic death of their parents. And they were twins, 7 years old at the time. And the boy was on the autism spectrum. Our life changed. Our life turned upside down. And if you met my son today, that boy, you wouldn't even know. Why? Because the 5 R's that God gave me, if we spread these out like other countries are doing, we're going to see a lot less autism. Does Tylenol cause autism? Okay, this is the question, right? Because of the announcement from the Trump administration, Bobby, I call him Bobby, but RFK. And look, I think that this is a hot topic because in the last 2 days since the announcement, I even had a medical doctor, a friend of mine, come up to me and said, Dan, what do you know about this? The fact that acetaminophen, active ingredient in Tylenol, causes autism. And he's a medical doctor. And I said, well, not that simple. It doesn't just by itself cause autism. There's other factors in what I call a perfect storm, and it could be a part of it, but many things are. I'm going to bring clarity to that in this episode. And also, I want to bring clarity to autism in general, and I want to bring clarity even to vaccinations. I don't want to get this shut down. This is how hot the topic is. But yet I want to do my best to bring you valuable information and even make that whole announcement more clear. This is going to be something you're going to want to share because I think that people just didn't understand the announcement. Again, even the medical doctor thinking, hey, this was the cause of autism. And then I said, oh, well, did you notice that Trump, being Trump as he does, just kind of spilled the beans? He started talking a lot about vaccinations. As a matter of fact, twice he talked about vaccinations, and I would argue he even did kind of a vaccine lecture. And he said, yeah, that was really odd. I didn't understand why he was talking about vaccinations when it was about Tylenol. And see, that's the thing. Trump was ahead of his administration, I think, in knowing that they're doing studies right now and they're showing that there is a connection with the vaccines. And look, I'll say it right now. The acetaminophen actually, and I'm going to get you to understand, and I think this is important, of what it's doing and why it could be part of the causative factor. And when you mix it in with vaccines that purposely, by the way, contain certain toxins. They're called adjuncts. What that means is if you give a dead virus, you need to excite the immune system against that attenuated virus. And therefore, we put certain things in there. And it used to be mercury. And by the way, a lot of mercury still in a lot of vaccines, even though they were said it was taken out. Well, it's still even in flu shots, most flu shots. And then when they did take mercury out, see, they still needed an adjunct to excite the immune system. So aluminum went in. So if you notice, a lot of announcements, and Trump talked about this too, that aluminum and mercury are being taken out. They're still there, but are going to be taken out of all of the vaccines. Here's the problem in my brain is you need an exciter. You need a toxin that excites the immune system so you can actually raise antibodies so the vaccine actually works. So what's going to be the next thing is my point. Okay, so let's not necessarily go there, but just understand that it is this combination of acetaminophen and the vaccines or the toxins necessarily in the vaccines that are part of the problem. Okay. Can a child get autism or be on the autism spectrum without the mother taking Tylenol? The answer is yes. So that in and itself is not the whole cause. That just proves the point. But again, no doubt, it absolutely ups the risk of that happening. Here's why. Tylenol, the acetaminophen, disrupts a folate pathway. Folate is a typical B vitamin that we need for something called methylation, which affects how our brain works. It affects neurodevelopment, and autism is a neurodevelopmental disease or condition. So it affects that. It affects neurotransmitters. These are chemicals that your brain needs to function normally, but it also affects detox, how we get toxins out of our body and even out of our brain. So it has a lot of different functions. It even works as an antioxidant, and it parallels something called glutathione, because folate is part of this methylation pathway, which is part of detox. So it helps with the brain. It helps with the development of the brain. It even protects DNA, and it also can help move toxins out of the body and detox. So now, Tylenol disrupts that. It affects some receptors to folate in the brain. Ultimately, then, therefore, it could drive inflammation of the brain, and therefore an autism spectrum disorder, depending on the severity of the inflammation. So Tylenol, acetaminophen in Tylenol, blocks these receptors, this folate pathway, and that affects the detox of the body and the brain. That affects the inflammation, and that even affects the DNA, et cetera, in the brain. So that's how there is a link. Oh, and by the way, acetaminophen, you might have known this, affects your liver greatly, which is another detox pathway. Oh, and also it affects a pathway of detox called the P450 pathway. So therefore, if we're giving a toxin at the same time a mother's on Tylenol, you can see if this affects how we get rid of these toxins and protects from inflammation, you can see that the body would not adapt to that stress of the toxin in the vaccine, and the two together is a perfect storm. However, they're going to discover other things, not just Tylenol, that are in this perfect storm when done with certain vaccines. And I believe a child could end up with autism even without necessarily a vaccine if there was a toxic stress or a perfect storm that occurred from something other than a vaccine. One of the things that when I'm lecturing about heavy metals that I point out is that heavy metals, the number one exposure to mercury is mom. The number of silver fillings, this is a German study called the Drash study. The number of silver fillings in mom's mouth in this study was proportional to how much mercury they found in the baby's brain in utero. And that study, by the way, was done on autopsies. So very accurate way to assess brain mercury and looking at that. By the way, the number one cause of lead is mom. So it's very normal to lose bone during pregnancy, but you know where most lead is stored? In the bone. So out comes the lead as their estrogen changes happen during pregnancy. It's normal, but that causes some bone loss. Again, normal, but the lead coming out from where it's stored is not normal. So we get a lot of exposure in utero, and if there's a lot of that exposure, and maybe mom's taking acetaminophen, then boom, we could have autism. But I think it was great that they pointed out that autism in communities like the Amish who aren't vaccinated, there's very little, if any, autism. So you can see that there is an absolute correlation, just like with the Tylenol. But yet when we don't have the vaccinations, and again, I want to be clear, I'm not telling anybody to vaccinate or not vaccinate. I'll stick with what Trump says for just the simplicity of this conversation. He said in his lecture that spread out the MMR. Why did he say that? Because the MMR, first of all, was very high in thimerosal, and I believe most of the thimerosal, by the way, contains mercury, and that is the adjunct that's put in the vaccines. But high levels of aluminum in the MMR. But when you put these three together, that's measles, mumps, and rubella, MMR. And when you put them together, it is a very high stress of toxicity on the body. Oh, and then the mother's taking acetaminophen, shutting down the detox pathways. Boom, recipe for disaster. So Trump was right in saying spread it out. There's no harm done if you spread it out. However, to his point, if you take them all together, it's proven there is harm. In the new studies that they're about to release, and again, I think Trump spilled the beans on this. I don't know that he was supposed to. I'm sure Bobby was sitting in the background going, oh gosh, zip it, is the fact that they're seeing an absolute correlation. He also warned parents about taking hepatitis B. His point, well taken. What is the chances of a baby getting a sexually transmitted disease? Well, so his point was it's useless to take it. And then he said, okay, don't just not take it, but take it later. Maybe age 12, you could give it later and you're not going to run the same risk. And again, so probably some good advice he was giving. I'm not giving advice. Trump made it clear too. I'm not giving advice, but this is what I would do. So I'm trying to be, as safe as I can here. At least as safe as Trump was, but saying spread out. He said, don't go to one baby visit to your pediatrician and get MMR, all the doses, boom. He said, spread it out to 4 or 5 and separate them. The measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, spread it out. And I couldn't agree more. Now, look, I'm going to caution here. I didn't vaccinate my children, and that was through a lot of research and understanding the literature on it. I think that there is another problem that when I looked at the literature, wasn't comfortable with. And again, this is a risk reward that every parent has to go through. So I'm not telling anyone to vaccinate or not. I'm saying, please do your own homework. Make the decision with your pediatrician, not me. Okay, so when I looked at the literature, the other problem I see is these vaccines can stimulate what is called a type 2 reaction, immune reaction. And that's an emergency reaction that raises up antibodies. And it gives us some protection in that time that you push those antibodies up. But what do we have to do? We have to take boosters. That means the antibodies come down, and then we have to give another vaccine, boost them back up. That's why they call them boosters, right? The problem with that is when you get a childhood disease, like we're talking about measles, mumps, rubella, whatever they are, chickenpox, you get a lifetime immunity. That's why when I was a kid, if there was measles, mumps, chickenpox down the street, we would send the kids, right? My parents sent me down to the kids' house next door because we had a playtime because we wanted everyone to get it. Let's get it at the same time. And you built a lifetime of immunity. Now, look, there's many studies that show that not only do you build that immunity, but you train the immune system to deal with much more complicated viruses and pathogens later in life. And they're shown to actually have less autoimmune, less cancer, et cetera, because of the training that the immune system got from getting the disease naturally, the illness naturally. But I want to be clear that when you get some of these childhood illnesses at the wrong times, so hypothetically, let's say that you get your child vaccinated at a certain age, and then maybe you forget the boosters and the antibodies drop, and now you didn't get it at the typical age that kids get measles, as an example. Now it can be more deadly if they get it as a teenager. You see, so getting these childhood conditions, illnesses is very important, and typically they do happen at certain ages. And when you get it at other ages, that can be absolutely more problematic. So I didn't vaccinate my children. I let them get all of those conditions. They had measles, they had mumps, not sure about rubella, they all had chickenpox. They were better for it. Okay, that was our decision to do that because here's the problem, ultimately the point I'm making. If you stimulate that emergency response immune system, there's no doubt it starts to create that pattern of emergency. And that's why I believe that it leads to all of the different allergies, a lot more food allergies, and even a lot more autoimmune. When you get a childhood disease the natural way, then you get a lifetime immunity. See, that's a Th1 reaction. So if you let your child get the condition by nature itself without the vaccine, you stimulate a Th1 reaction, not a Th2. That's a lifetime immunity. You don't need boosters. Makes sense? And then you protect the child as a teenager getting measles because they have lifetime immunity. See, so when it would be more deadly to get it later. So look, I've done my homework. Many of you would say, what about polio? What about that? Well, the fact is polio, because of the sewer systems being cleaned up, a lot of it was being directed from the sanitation. So because they started realizing what was happening with that, they changed a lot. Plumbing was developed, sewer systems, how they're filtering it, dealing with it, the waste in the streets. All of that made things cleaner, but ultimately it was already down. You can look on the CDC graphs yourself of when it was already down. Then the vaccine actually created a spike. And so there's a lot more to that story than meets the eye. But the bottom line is that Trump was right in the sense that if we spread these vaccines out like other countries are doing, we're going to see a lot less autism. And by the way, I think one of the really important points that was made as well, that this doctor that I spoke to pointed out, he says, well, gosh, I thought it was just a genetic disorder. And I'm like, well, you thought that because you were told that. He says, yes. And I said, but it's not. I said, you realize that billions of dollars, all the money for research on autism, they've been looking under the wrong rock. They've been looking for the genetic link. There isn't a genetic link. By proven, it was, look, 1 in at 1.1, and Trump made the point, 1 in 30,000 cases of autism, 1 in 30,000 at one point, and even less than that before. But that wasn't even that long ago. And then it went to 1 in 20,000, and then 1 in 10,000. Today, his point was 1 in 31. Oh, in states like California, 1 in 12 boys. By 2032, if everything stays the same statistically, we're going to be at 1 in 2. That's a scary number by 2032. Now, I think that what they're doing is going to change that number. So I don't think we're going to see that. That's my hope. But they talked about, and there's a little bad information here too. I don't want to say bad information, just a misunderstanding I'm going to bring clarity to. And they said that, hey, there's a new, I think the drug is called leucoferrin, I believe, maybe I'm mispronouncing it, but it's basically essentially folate. It's a form of folate called folinic acid, which is a good form that typically autistic children really do respond well. And I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's 60-some% have a positive response, meaning, wow, they're better. Language got better. Communication, eye contact got better just by giving this form of folate. Please do not take synthetic folate. Folic acid, not good because it's not metabolized, can build up and cause other problems, even toxicity. Don't want to do that. So the folinic acid or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate are the better forms. But anyways, this the answer is, hey, get this. This is going to be a prescription, most likely covered by your insurance, which is great. I hope that's the case, that insurance does cover it, because it's probably expensive. I think it is over $100 a bottle. But the fact is this: folate in the right form absolutely helps this process of neurodevelopmental problems. It prevents a lot of them. It's not, I want to be clear, it's not the cure for autism, this folic acid that they're using. It helps it. That's only one pathway that's affected. There's a lot of other detox pathways that have been shut down because of this perfect storm that I'm talking about, and those need to be dealt with. 20 years of teaching doctors. Real detox is the cell. When those pathways shut down, glutathione, methylation, etc., we start to store up toxins in the cell, and then we start to turn on bad genes. We start to have other problems, autoimmune problems, hormone problems, etc. And by the way, that's why a lot of adults don't feel well either. But we have to fix those pathways, not just the methylation pathway. When I teach detox, I have my 5 R's. R number 1 is remove the sources, okay? R number 2 is regenerate cell membranes inside and out. R number 3 is restore the cell energy, very important. R4 is reduce the cellular inflammation. R5 is reestablish methylation. That's what the Tylenol interfered with, the folic acid, which affects methylation. So we're talking about one pathway of 5 that I teach of how we actually upregulate and get detox pathways opening in. Well, that's what you need to do with these autistic kids. That's what most Americans need to do, period, to even for their hormones to work again. But okay, the point is that, folic acid very important. I think this is a good step in the right direction. I applaud what they've done, what they're doing, but we're going to hear other announcements coming, probably other things, even like low vitamin D and how that is part and could be a part of this perfect storm, because low vitamin D is a prohormone that affects a lot of inflammation pathways that absolutely could be causative as well, or at least part of the cause. So I think there's other things. I don't think it's just acetaminophen. I think there's other toxins, medications. You could be living in a moldy home and that person get a vaccine. Boom, perfect storm because of the stress of the mold. You get my point, is that I don't want people to think that it's as simple as acetaminophen causing autism. No. And again, reflecting back, that's why Trump was talking about the vaccine part of that, which we're going to hear more. But I appreciate the fact that the administration wants these studies to be further along, finished. But look, past studies. I know Bobby very well. I've sat at dinner table with him. I've been in conversations with him. He gets this toxic connection. He gets the fact that this is something that we're doing. It's not genetic. And I don't even know if I finished that point, that if it were genetic, genetics do not change in 30 years, 40 years, even 100. Genetics change over generations, so it can't be genetic. We watch the numbers go from 1 in 30,000 down to 1 in 2. It's like, or 1 in 10, 1 in 10. In California, 1 in 10, 1 in 12 is the estimation, or at least even 1 in 31. Oh no, that's something we're doing. Oh, and you know what they say, by the way? You know what the medical community says when they're pressed on that? Well, genetics can't change that fast, so it's not genetic. Oh, it's just because we're diagnosing it better. Does anybody believe that? Do you believe that? I don't believe that for a second. Nobody does. It's ridiculous. Because you know why? The reality is this. We didn't see, when I was going to school, there wasn't one autistic child in our school, let alone my classroom, in the school. Okay, so don't hand me that. We know what an autistic child looks like. We can see it, and now we see them all around us. And it's a shame. It's horrible. If you've ever watched an autistic child, it is, in fact, hard to watch. And someone made that point on that announcement. It's very, very difficult to watch. Destroys families. And look, I have this story myself because we had a horrible incident in our family. We inherited 2 kids because of the tragic death of their parents. And one of the child, they were twins, 7 years old at the time. And the boy was on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, sensory integration. And our life changed. Our life turned upside down. And if you met my son today, that boy, you wouldn't even know. Why? Because the 5 R's that God gave me, pain to purpose, if you can see that behind me, pain to purpose. Getting myself well, I started applying everything I learned to Dylan, and yeah, you wouldn't even know it today. So an amazing, amazing young man. He's 29 today, 29 now. But the point is this. There's a lot of people don't have those resources, et cetera, or the knowledge to bring a child through that. We're going to get that out there. It's part of my calling from pain to purpose. But, you know, when we're looking at these children and the suffering and that what it brings into the family, you know, having experienced it personally, I can tell you it's very, very difficult. But that said, I think there's hope right now for the first time because we're finally not going down the wrong road of genetics, and we're finally looking at real cause. What we're doing that's driving this. And again, we don't need to point fingers. I think everyone has good intentions with vaccinations. I think everyone has good intentions even with Tylenol. I think good intentions are all over this, but let's open the door to have the conversation. Because by the way, if you spoke about this on social media a few years ago, you're shut down. Oh yeah, if you insinuate that anything drug-related is a causative factor of this, you're done. You're taking it down. Now we can at least have this conversation without blame. The fact is that we are doing something, a perfect storm has been created to where 1 in 31 kids are on this autism spectrum. So if we can have the conversation without being shut down, we're going to get to an answer. We're going to get to more solutions. when we can talk about it. That's why I'm doing this right now. Do I want to bring clarity to the announcement? I do, because again, a lot of misunderstanding. It's not Tylenol alone, a lot of misunderstanding. The folic acid drug is not the sole solution. It's not the cure for autism, because I've been hearing that too. It's the cure for autism, not the case. It is absolutely beneficial. It is absolutely part of something that's going to help. But you know what? I believe that now that we're talking about this and able to express these opinions, I think we're going to get to other causes. I'm going to be able to share more of what I did for my son. I'm going to be able to share more of what I have learned over the years of dealing with this. The world needs to know, but we have all been afraid of the conversation because, God forbid, we speak against the holy sacred cow. You have to understand that Bobby wants to change two things about vaccines. Two things. Number one, he wants it treated just like any other drug. If you are injured by it and can prove that, you can bring a lawsuit against the company, the drug company that made that drug. Do you know vaccines are the only drug you cannot bring litigation against? Yep, that's right. Since the 1980s, they have that protection. How's that sound? Good or bad? No, because see, they don't even have to prove safety. That's the other thing he wants to change, that you have to do double-blind studies. Just like every other drug, you have to do double-blind studies to show safety. You don't have to with this drug. You don't. Why? Why? What are we afraid of? So it's become the holy grail. It's become the cash cow. That's going to change. It has to change. Okay, so Bobby makes it clear he's not anti-vax. I'm not coming across as anti-vax. Everybody wants a safer product. Everybody wants something that we don't have to look at this risk reward and say, well, gosh, I'm not, going there. So the fact is, if we change those two things, then we're going to drive companies to make a safer product. That's it. They have to prove safety, just like every other drug. And if they can be sued, you're darn right, they're going to prove safety. That's the problem that I have. Listen, here's the other thing that needs to change. Do you know that pediatricians get bonused on the having a percentage of their practice vaccinated? So the pressure comes. Do you know they get penalized when they absolutely don't vaccines or keep up with a certain percentage of their practice? Yeah, they get monitored. That has to change. So maybe that started with good intentions. I don't know. But I know this now, that is not a good practice. And I know that Bobby wants that to change as well. But let me tell you something. Pray for the man, because the resistance is great. He's coming up against big agriculture, all the pesticides. How's that going to work? Monsanto, glyphosate. Oh, yeah. I believe the glyphosate increase, this is a pesticide that we're spraying on most of the food supply. It's in 60% of the rainfall. It opens up the gut barrier and the blood-brain barrier. I believe it's part of this perfect storm. Maybe the administration is going to show that there's a causative factor here like there is with Tylenol. I believe that's the case. I believe that the rise since the 1990s we saw on graphs of the use of glyphosate in every neurodegenerative condition, neurodevelopmental condition has risen the same. And it allows toxins to cross deeper in the brain. Sounds like part of the perfect storm. So it sounds like it's not just acetaminophen, is it? Well, if something allows toxins to go into the brain and cross the gut and cause gut inflammation, sounds like autism problem to me. Okay, so he's coming up against that. He's coming up against big food, the dyes and all that, making them change. Come on. And then he's coming up against big pharma. Wow. Pray for the man, because I have fear. But for such a time as this, God has put him in this position. He wasn't meant to be president. He was meant to be exactly where he is. And by the way, I told, very good friends around him that this is the case, that and before it even happened, that I don't think he's going to become president, but he's going to have some huge role in the health of kids. I didn't even think of the position he's in right now, but God had thought it through perfectly. So look, I share this, and I do pray protection over it. It doesn't get taken down, but I don't think that it will. I think that we have a little bit of more ability. I'm not saying anyone to vaccinate, not vaccinate. I'm not giving medical advice here. I'm sharing my story, and I'm sharing my opinions. As a matter of fact, I'm just sharing and bringing clarity to what was already announced. And so I think that we're good. But I want more freedom. I want more freedom around these conversations. And the big companies are going to do everything they can, along with social media, to shut them down. I hope that doesn't happen. We need durability in these things that are getting set up now, because what's the next administration going to bring? I don't know. We don't know. No one knows. But we need durability around these decisions that are being made now, because these forces that have more money than any corporations in the world right now they're not going away. So somehow we have to involve them in the process, but somehow we have to really make this a unified front for the sake, not of business, not of dollars, but for the sake of children, right? We look at the chronic disease right now that's happening in children. And that is the greatest tragedy of all. Listen, Trump said something and he meant it. He said, look, I don't even want to answer questions about policy. I don't want to answer questions about, what's going on in Europe right now. He didn't want to take, questions about anything political. I just want questions on this. He said, because this is more important than anything else that we can discuss. Man, is he right on that? The health of our children, the future of America, the future of this country, the future of the world hinges on these topics that we need to discuss right here. If you looked at what happened to Charlie Kirk, right? What happened? Was that assassination against Charlie Kirk? No, it was against the freedom to discuss topics that we don't agree on. See, when we don't agree and we talk about things, we get further to the truth. And that's the same with this topic, right? We can have emotional opinions about this, and there's nothing more emotional than this topic of vaccines. But it's good that we can talk about it and come to a further truth. If we stop talking and look at people who don't vaccinate as villains and the people who do as villains, we've got a problem, because we are going to end up again with further division and further problems. Charlie's goal was to bring it together, have discussions, and lead further to truth, and he got killed for it. Pray for this man right now. Pray for Bobby, because I know the enemy wants him gone. But you know what? Let's see what God does with it if it happens. We're going to see what God does with Charlie Kirk, because I believe God will work it for good. I believe he was called to it, and I believe that his ministry is going to rise. I believe that it literally, that from his death, is going to usher in the greatest revival in young people ever in the history of humanity. That's my belief, because God allowed it, and if he allowed it, he's got something bigger. I'm telling you, he's got something huge around the bend. My father-in-law called and said to my wife, and I was overhearing the call, Marilee, that's my wife's name, if God really loved him, if God, cared, then why didn't he protect him, Marilee? And I was in the background coming out of my skin, and I ended up getting on the phone saying, Rod, wait till you see what's coming. God allowed it because he has a purpose. He has a plan, because he loves us that much. And Charlie was born for it. And I'll tell you, we haven't seen the end of it. Listen, I pray that's not the case for Bobby. I pray he's still here, because I pray he still has physical work to do for such a time as this. And I believe he too was called for such a time as this. Take the politics out of it, please. These aren't politic problems in the sense that we side up. We want to side up on the side of right, and we want to side up on the side of what is good for our children. If we can talk about it, keep the politics out of it. I mean, at the end of the day, we need politics to drive policy, but the fact is that we can't be emotional. We need, for the children's sake, to discuss these issues and get more solutions and get rid of the cause, because no doubt there is a cause of autism. It is not a genetic disorder. Hope this helps. Please share this and pray for those men, and pray for what's going on, and even pray that this doesn't get shut down. Thank you.